Hello, everyone. This is Greg Drevenstedt, editor-in-chief at Rider Magazine, and your host for the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast. This is our first episode of 2022, and I want to wish everyone a Happy New Year and thank you for listening. Our guest today is Brian Case. Brian is an industrial designer who is the former chief designer for Confederate Motorcycles. He also served as co-founder and design director for Motus Motorcycles, where he led the design and development of the MST V-4. Brian joined the Barber Vintage Motorsports Museum in 2019, and last year, he became the director of the new Barber Advanced Design Center. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, it's an honor to have you on the show. I've known about your work for a number of years, but we've never met in person. And in fact, we're doing this remotely. You're in Birmingham. I'm in California. We're doing this over the internet. But I know that you are an industrial designer. You've had a long career doing that. And I'm curious because, designing motorcycles is what you've done for a living. And that sounds like a dream job for many people. People love riding motorcycles, but, the idea of what goes into making a cool motorcycle is something that a lot of us are curious about. So I know in your past you worked briefly for Confederate, and you were involved in designing the Wraith. You're also the design director and co-founder of Motus Motorcycles. So tell us a little bit about your background in terms of how you got involved in motorcycle design and industrial design.
Yeah, well, it was not entirely by accident. So I went to school for industrial design and product design, right? And when I was in school, I had sort of a fascination with two-wheeled things. And I was thinking I would go into bicycle design. Motorcycle design was not something I ever studied. So I had an interest in bicycle design, and, my dream job would have been like Trek or like Cannondale or something right out of school. And, at that time, this was like, 99, 2000 timeframe. So I'm just getting out of art school, and I had an injury with my left hand at work. I was working nights at a plastics plant, and it kind of set me back. Got depressed a bit, and it mangled my left hand, and I was riding street bikes at the time, so I had to give that up. Just personally, I gave it up. I just quit, and I couldn't operate the clutch. So it was a big setback. And I kind of got yanked out of that mindset very abruptly when I met the designer for Confederate Motorcycles. That guy was JT Nesbitt. So I met him in 2004, and he, I'll keep it PG for your audience here, but he told me in a way that I needed to hear it, that I needed to cut that thing off and move on with my life. And so that is what yanked me out of that funk. And I joined up with him and helped him create the Wraith, which was in 2004. And so I had a design firm in Pittsburgh. So my little team there all worked together. It was like a crash course on motorcycle design, and no idea what we were doing. Just borrowing from industrial design trade of, human factors, just kind of solving challenges like we would design a chair, packaging design. So we approached it that way, but had no clue about motorcycle. What's a motorcycle designer? I had no idea. So yeah, that's what got me into it. And then that was like the time of my life, just doing a motorcycle like that, which was avant-garde. It was 3 or 4 months from like the first sketch to running it at the Bonneville Salt Flats.
Wow.
And it was an emotional high for all of us, and a very small team at the time, and Confederate at that time, and they've changed their name now and rebranded and gone in a whole new direction. And that was just a great time with a very small group of people to do something like that. So that's what got me into it. And I thought, I came back from that, came back to Pittsburgh and thought, this is like my dream. Like I want to do motorcycle design now, it's so cool. It's like, it's packaging. You're having to consider all sorts of factors to package all these components, thousands of components even, into something that looks cool and feels cool and sounds cool and all that. So that's what got me into it. Yeah.
So if I could ask, for listeners who may not be familiar with the Wraith, I actually lived in New Orleans when Confederate was based there, and actually went to, it was a small shop and in a brick industrial space in downtown, and actually met JT, and as he was working on an early farm, I think he was actually prepping it for a show or something. And just to see the Wraith, was exotic materials, it had carbon fiber, it had this, as you said, very avant-garde design where it really did not stick to the conventions, because in some ways motorcycle design has got this orthodoxy and this tradition, and you think about cruisers and so forth that have been there's a through line there. But what was it like to work on something that really, it seemed like it was very blue sky? It was just like, hey, let's take this in a direction that motorcycles just really haven't gone.
Well, that's what attracted me to it. And that was, seeing something different, I felt, in 2004, let's say that's like maybe the peak of the American chopper type craze, right? It kind of crashed after that. And I felt like, here's a little tiny boutique brand doing things with carbon fiber and, avant-garde design. So that's what attracted me to it. And a lot of that had to do with JT, and he was kind of pushing the boundaries. And so that Wraith project, with a carbon fiber girder front suspension, complete throwback to board track racer days, but with new materials. And I loved all of that stuff. And so it was just kind of like a very free form design, not a lot of constraints, not even really a cost constraint. It was just, just make a badass motorcycle. So that was, that era. And then of course, after Katrina, it was kind of rekindling that whole brand from scratch. And I left Pittsburgh, joined up with them, and it was, folks like the Barber organization, the museum in Birmingham, draws people from all over the world. And so that was the first time I saw it. It was in 2004, and it had just opened the year before. And so I was driving down from Pittsburgh, coming through Birmingham, stop off at this museum that JT told me about. And I have the same reaction that everyone has when they come here for the first time. They walk through the lobby and just complete jaw drops on the floor. It's overwhelming to see this collection in one place. So that was the first moment that the spark was ignited in me, that this collection in Birmingham, Alabama could be used as a resource. And that I'm starting to come to terms with that now because of what I'm doing now with this design center inside the building. This has been a resource for 18 years for lots of people. It's inspiration. And so over the years, this has been burning in the back of my mind that there's other designers that come here all the time and just research. It's just like a big library. Like, sure, let's just look at everything we can possibly look at and then put all that into the hopper and come up with something new. And so that kind of gelled and rolled into this whole concept, going way back. And after Confederate is when I got the bug again. Like, what am I going to do with my life? Am I a designer? I was just questioning everything, right? So I go back into freelance mode. Like, I'm going to just pick up some freelance jobs, do some design. I'm now living in Birmingham. I had a girlfriend, so I had kind of made my life in Birmingham, and started sketching some ideas that became the Motus, an all new American V4 powertrain. And that was the counter reaction to what I thought at the time. I was kind of bored with American V twin, right? And it just was so much everywhere. It's just, I wanted to come up with something different that was undeniably American, but didn't tread on other American V-twin brands and designs. Let them do that. You know, Harley is iconic. No one does it better than Harley. You know, like that classic nostalgia. You know, Victory at the time was around still. So Buell, like I kind of put all these things like, well, what am I going to do that's any different than these guys? So that museum, came back to the museum again. Well, I'm just going to go park myself with a sketch pad in the corner of the museum and just immerse myself in motorcycle nostalgia and history. And there is now 155 years of motorcycle evolution in one building. So that's what I did when in the early days before Motus was even Motus. I was just sketching a bike. And I got, you know, I could name off a list of every bike that was like influenced, the Britain, of course, you know,
Sure.
the V1000. It's like, okay, well, I'm not going to top that. So, you know, it's kind of like all these classic designs that I've always loved, you know, the 999, the MGS01, the Moto Guzzi, that one-off racer. I had all these bikes in my inspiration wall, my mood board.
Right.
But that mood board was a physical brick and mortar building. And I could just go walk up to the bike and study it, break it apart. So I'm not the first to do that. I knew other designers were doing that, and we would talk about it. So didn't think anything of it at the time. So after Motus closed in 18, I was back to that. What do I do with my life? Freelance mode again. And, you know, start doing some furniture and carpentry and, you know, just doing woodworking in my basement. And, you know, that's industrial design. Maybe I'll go back into furniture design or something. And that's when I got the call from, you know, Mr. Barber, his executive team, just kind of, what are you up to? You know? So we met over a few months in 2019. And, you know, I was tasked with coming up with this vision, what this became, you know, an extension of Mr. Barber's vision 20 some years ago, when this was, you know, 800 acres of just forest. I mean, he came out here with 5 or 6 people and said, we're going to build something world-class here. And so this is an extension of that same vision, the same people that are still here. And what I came up with was what I felt was missing in the building, which was the intense study of design and engineering, the backstory of these machines. We have concourse quality restorations on the floor, priceless examples of motorcycle history. But what steps were taken? What was the workflow to produce that machine, to get it here after its life? And so that's something I had a little bit of knowledge in on the design side. Like I could do that. I could peel back the layers of the onion and figure out who was the designers and how did they make the patterns to cast the engine parts, and, you know, just more to the story. And so I put a venue to that, a space inside of the building. And that's what it's become, is this epicenter of design and creativity and free thinking in a neutral territory. So what we're starting to realize now, a year into this, is that this is neutral ground. This isn't a branded design consultancy focused on a select number of OEMs. This is like Switzerland. This is neutral ground. This is a nonprofit museum. It's the world's largest motorcycle museum. We can approach design in a almost an open source approach and share it with the world.
Right.
So sure. It becomes kind of a new thing that we're approaching, and that's what led to the Supermono project. So in this process last year, you know, in the middle of COVID and we're, you know, travel restrictions and all this stuff, Pierre Terblanche was able to come over on holiday. So we spent some time with him, and we hadn't even built out the center yet. So this was, you know, the tail end of 20 and
Sure.
December and January. We broke ground in January of 21 on this place. So Pierre's here. So think back a little bit. Pierre's here. We're just hanging out, having fun, talking about motorcycles. I did an interview with him. And I'm not sure if you can post a link to that too.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, we
or
can
just
that.
direct people to the Barber YouTube channel. So there's an interview. So I sat him down. He's here. Let's just set up pull together a camera and a microphone, and let's talk about your career and your life. Well, he's got, I don't know, dozen or so bikes in the museum that he's had a hand in designing. Sure. So to me, he's a master. You know, he's up there. He's been a mentor and a friend since 2006 for me. And so what can I learn from this guy? Sitting him down in front of some of his designs and to reflect on those. And we had, you name it. We had the Hyper Motard out there, the Sport Classics. We pulled a bunch of bikes in the frame, but it was at that time that we were looking at the Supermono, and we have number 38 of 66 or 67 examples. And it's just exquisite. I mean, it's a 0 mile right out of the crate, purchased in 1994.
So for people that aren't familiar with the Supermono, because I mean, this Pierre, Terblanche, a lot of his stuff that you mentioned, are like you mentioned some of his models are when he was his time with Ducati. So you mentioned Hyper Motard. He designed the first Multistrada. You mentioned the Sport Classics, the 999. Some of these bikes, as people may or may not remember, were quite controversial back then. They were it was kind of a love it or hate it design, which and it seems like the appreciation from some of those bikes is increased over time. It's become less polarizing, but the Supermono is kind of considered one of his top designs, but it's a very specialized motorcycle that people made. So tell us a little bit about what the Supermono is, so why this got to be selected for this project.
Yeah, I really have come to appreciate that particular bike through this process over the last year. And that's what the Barber Museum allowed us to do. And it was just such a cool opportunity to sit Pierre down, have the bike behind us, and while we were freshening it up for the big photo shoot, we were pulling off fairings, we're dusting it. He's there. He's in the shop downstairs in the basement. He's helping. Well, no, you got to take this fastener out first to get to this one, and it's just like you could see him getting emotional. He was thinking back 29 years at the time, and he's like, I remember this. Like, this is why we did this. And it was becoming emotional for him. And it was cool because we're coming up on 30 years of that bike, and it's now been 30 years. And so it is kind of a milestone for Ducati, right?
Sure.
And of course we're doing all this clearly without Ducati's knowledge. He's just here, visiting the museum. So it was just a neat little idea to say, why don't we dissect this one? This is the one. Why it's the one, that would probably be a good question for him. For him, it was, it in ways informed the 916.
Sure.
If you look at the two and compare the two side by side, at the time, this was 91, 92 at a little studio it was San Marino, wherever the, CRC, the studio was.
Yeah.
And it was this little tiny team. He's working, he's under Tamburini. This was the first project for Domenicali. He was a junior engineer at Ducati. So it was like all these cool little things. And it was like, this is a cool story. It's an analog bike. And so that is when the idea was bedded in that the Supermono would be kind of the first project of the Barber Advanced Design Center as an intensive case study of design workflows. So what we came up with is, well, while you're here, Pierre, why don't you what about revisiting this design?
Right.
What would you do differently? Right. That's what every designer would ask him. Right. So, of course, he's just like, oh, well, I've been thinking about it for 30 years. So he's like, thank you for this opportunity. Right. So that's what we did. So in a sense, we kind of commissioned him to dream up these, kind of put his head back in the same space in 91, 92, lop off a cylinder of their superbike winning 888 motor, right? The peak performance engine at the time, lop it off, make a 600 cc, club racer to fit into the Supermono series at the time, right? So kind of get into that same headspace, but use modern tools and design workflows, 3D printing, and that's kind of how that all evolved. And so in 4 months' time, from the first sketches that were almost entirely in 3D, and it's really cool to see a guy like Pierre and work alongside him at his age and 40 plus career in design industry, and still use some of the most advanced CAD tools that are out there. And he has a very simple approach. He uses some of the least expensive software to acquire, because he's all about just fast sketching, hashing out, blocking in shapes. And so using the tools of today that you have at your disposal. So that was a very rapid process over Zoom and WhatsApp, and we're like texting and chatting on WhatsApp, like, hey, what do you think of this and that? And then we bring in Filippo Corticelli, who's in London in between jobs, and he's like getting ready to go to his next gig, and he's like, yeah, well, because Pierre and Filippo worked together way back. Filippo was there on the Multistrada and the 999, which was their first CAD bike. Okay. So you think about when the 999 came out, that was their first bike they did entirely on CAD. Right. Late 90s. Yeah. So so it was really fun to kind of work alongside these guys and put all of these pieces into a case study of sorts that the Barber Museum is going to roll out and share. Say, hey, this is how this design flow worked, and this is what we came up with, and then we're just going to share it. It doesn't go anywhere. The concept bike that we built lives right here in this space. Whether we build it and run it and put it on the track, we don't know yet, but there is a track out back. So a nice one. it is a nice track, and it would make sense that we do these kind of design studies and look into, well, how could we improve on aero? And Pierre has some great ideas on improving aero on modern two-wheeled machines. And so this particular bike has a radiator in a completely different place. It's in the middle of the bike, and the frame is the ductwork. The entire frame is the radiator, heat exchanger, and I think it's brilliant.
Well, I've seen the photos. Peter Jones did a story for us. We went to the the Barber Vintage Festival last October. He met with you, went to the design center. We'll make sure to include some photographs of basically what this concept bike is. So it's not, just so people understand it, this was not just hey, let's take apart the Supermono and figure out how it was done and how you could create it now. But you came up with a completely different motorcycle. It looks, you can probably see some connections between the two, but this is a unique motorcycle, like trying to recreate something in a different way. And it's a very impressive, again, I've only seen it in photos, but it's very impressive looking. So yeah, that's what you're talking about with a different frame design and where the radiators and so forth. This is on this, physical 3-dimensional concept bike that you guys built using this collaborative process with Pierre. So
that's right. Yeah, I mean, it was the concept, how it came together is what we're going to roll out. So we're just building an all new YouTube channel that can follow along this project now, because it's not complete. Mm-hmm. So we're just now finishing it, and I've got a few more parts to print, and then we're going to reveal the rest of the package and the powertrain and what that all looks like. And it very much could be a real bike. I mean, we could immediately make it. And it is a, you know, just the workflow of the design itself, how we were able to do it completely over, you know, the internet, and come together. And, you know, at the last minute, you know, he's emailing me files to print, and I printed 150 parts in, you know, 2 weeks.
Wow.
And that was the, you know, the final push. What Peter saw at the Vintage Fest in October was the big unveiling of the concept. I had just finished spray painting. You know, I had you know, 4 or 5 people, extra hands. We had this quick little team we threw together in the last couple of weeks of the project. So it entirely existed on computer for 3.5 months.
Yeah.
And then it's just like everything fits, and Pierre's showing me the computer models, and Filippo's working on this, the surfacing, the Class A surfacing. It all comes together, and it's basically just hit print. And so 150 parts were printed right here in the building.
And what sort of material do you, when you say you're 3D printing these parts, what material are you printing these? You know, is it a type of plastic or something?
Well, yeah, because this is just a concept bike right now. It's in almost entirely plastic.
Yeah.
So there's a few aluminum parts and steel parts that we just machined.
Yeah.
But yeah, the concept is a proposal. So for instance, the swing arm is printed for the concept bike in plastic, and it was printed overnight. You know, so in less than, you know, 12 hours, I've got a physical shape that I can bolt up, and it's printed in plastic. The proposal would be titanium. Sure. You know, so this would be something that we would then go to direct metal printing, and we'd print it in titanium, because it's not a mass produced bike. This is a concept bike. Sure. So we just need to make one-off parts. So yeah, this concept, what you've seen pictures of the white bike, is entirely 3D printed. The Dunlops are real, but we fitted them to 3D printed rims. So it was really neat to see it come together. I think even Pierre will tell you, like, he's impressed I pulled it off. So I only pulled one all-nighter. If that tells you the level of, I was expecting like a good 4 to 5 all-nighters, but I only needed to do one. So I think that's why he's like, not bad, kid.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the interesting thing is, you know, like I said, you know, you've got this video where you interview Pierre, and he really starts by saying, it's like, hey, I'm 64. I mean, he's still in the game, but he's looking back on most of his career at this point. And so to be able to take something that he's really well known for, to sort of reimagine it in a modern way, it's got to be, I mean, I would imagine it would be gratifying for him. But as you said, this is not, even though you guys were working on the inspiration for this was a Ducati motorcycle, this is not within the Ducati company. This is at the museum. That, as you said, this is kind of an open source. I mean, I've read enough press kits and seen design sketches and so forth, but manufacturers keep that stuff under lock and key. It's their intellectual property. It's the 11 herbs and spices that only their designers keep. Everything's are, you know, so to be able to share this with a wider audience, whether it's design students or, you know, people that are historians that are writing books or something about the design of motorcycles, but just to be able to share this in a more public way sounds quite unique and a real service to the industry. So. Yeah,
that's right. I mean, typically what you find with in-house design studios or agencies is things are under wraps, you know, sometimes 4 or 5 years, just for marketing purposes. They don't want to let the cat out of the bag. So, you know, the clay models and the design sketches always come out after the bike is launched or right around the time. So who knows what they're working on right now that we're not going to see for 5 years. So the purpose of this now is let's shine the spotlight on the process as it's happening in real time. Use today's the most advanced technology we can get our hands on, and getting into additive manufacturing, design for additive manufacturing, and coming up with shapes that are almost would have been impossible a few years ago. Sure. And that's the idea: show it now and roll that into our education programs at the museum. So we're showing students of all ages now what's out there, you know, what excites them, you know, show them, I could show them a clay model, something I did 10 years ago that's design studios still use today. Still use clay modeling. It's a great medium to hash out an idea from 2D to 3D and show it to people. So showing a third grader that playing with clay could lead to a career in design, you know, that resonates with some kids, and it's great to see that happen. And so, but we're also showing advanced engineering, reverse engineering, and laser scanning, which helps the museum too. We have a restoration department. I would argue it's one of the best restoration departments in the world for motorcycles. Mm-hmm. And this is bringing a little bit of technology, high tech, you know, forensic engineering to that. Right. Being able to take a 1904 cylinder head casting that is unobtainable.
Right.
Can't find a replacement for that. And in this business, we tend to just wait for it to show up, you know, someone to donate it, and just, you know, so projects can lie dormant for a long time. And we have 400 to 500 bikes lying dormant. Right. The ones on the floor, they're all out and done, but we have a massive warehouse of stuff that we're waiting on parts for. Right. So, you know, I look at it as a way to bring some tools in, and if I can laser scan this object and create a pattern and go to a foundry, and we can authentically recreate this. Right. Right. As authentic as a museum such as ours can do. You know, we have this tremendous history, this backlog. We have a research library with almost 14,000 books. So I think it was, I think we just kind of hit on something that is just the beginning. And this project with the mono project, we call it, is just the tip of the iceberg. Like, I'm itching to like, what, I mean, there's 1,000 other stories in here. And if I could pull a designer in, you know, from wherever, and it's like, hey, here's one of your bikes you did right here. Tell us about that. Well, what would you do differently? How did you do it? And blah, blah, blah. So, yeah. So
the Barber Advanced Design Center, it really just opened. I mean, just, you know, in less than a year ago. So you say it's located in the museum. Where is it in the museum?
Right. So it's on the top floor of the museum. So overlooking the racetrack. And it's the entire floor. There's a gallery outside that's kind of a mini curated gallery of design icons. And right now it's open to designers in the industry and students by appointment. So, yeah.
Sure. So do you have, as I say, since this is fairly new, and this is something that sounds like you were encouraged by George Barber to start something like this. So where do you see things going next? I mean, in terms of, will this be I know you said it's open by appointment for designers and so forth, but will you see educational programs? Is this, you know, what else do you see going on with the design center?
That's kind of the idea, but we don't know where it's going to go yet. Okay. And so this is kind of ground floor, and we're going to explore and let it kind of evolve organically. So that's the purpose for reaching out to designers, professionals in the industry, design students and educators, and have that inform the direction that we take it, but open it up to them first. And in addition to being on display here. So if you're a visitor to the museum, the studio is all glass, and it's a working design studio. So people can look in and see 3D printing happening. And so the intent there is to eventually hold more seminars and workshops and bring people inside and expose them to these design engineering processes.
Right. Well, I mean, you know, as you said, you know, I imagine it's quite exciting to be part of a center that, I mean, it's not part of a school where it's got necessarily an educational, you know, it's got its own objectives, or a design studio within an agency or an OEM where its directive is to create commercially viable products. But this is, you know, sounds like it's much more of a design think tank, you know, and it can really, you know, can go in a lot of different directions. So
that's right. And the goal what George Barber wants to see more than anything is that that spark of imagination, that light that people, when they come here, it's what's great about this place for the last 18 years is people of all ages get something out of it, even if you're not into motorcycles. It's
Sure.
just the sheer vastness of the place and the spotlight shining on these works of machinery that anybody gets excited about it. And so that's really what he's asked me to do is do more of that, is spark that imagination in people of all ages. And I've seen it just in the past year. And with the young kids, I've met, grade school kids that have their own 3D printers, and they're like already aware of this stuff, and it's cool. It's kind of it's the parents and the adults that are, more difficult to convince this is the future, right? But the younger the generation, it's amazing that they just get it, and all you have to do is kind of pull back the curtain a little bit and show them like this is the future, and it can set them on a path. I mean, it can change their life. And I was that kid. I saw a Streamliner when I was 9 years old go almost 300 miles an hour.
Yeah.
That had a lasting impact on me,
Right.
And I can say that now because I can't seem to get away from motorcycles.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, so like I said, unfortunately, I've never been to the Barber Museum. That's like kind of one of the big blank spots, and being able to experience the motorcycles and history. And what I'd like to hear, and everyone I've talked to, is that you need to spend at least a full day there, preferably be a weekend, because you've got how many vehicles on display in the museum?
There is roughly 1,200 on display at any given time.
And most of them are motorcycles. I know you've got a handful of cars there, but just to be able to go through and experience, the vehicles and the history. But it sounds like it's not just a let's just preserve history, but let's understand it. Let's share it, in terms of the next generation. And that's an important part of what a museum can do. So it's in Birmingham, Alabama. It's open pretty much year round. I know there's the Barber Vintage Festival takes place in October. There are several other events, but what's the best way for people to sort of keep up with what's going on at the museum and the design center? Yeah,
go to barbermuseum.org. That's our main website, and you'll see the museum on there and the racetrack, and that's the best way to reach out to us. But yeah, consider this your personal invitation. Come out and see me and spend a day here. You will love it.
I can't wait. So, and also you mentioned that the Mono project is really going to be more fully unveiled or released in the weeks or months ahead. Do you have kind of
over the coming months? Yeah, and there's no sense of urgency to it because this is a learning project. So we're going to roll out some the behind the scenes stuff of the process, and the CAD designs and the scanning process and the 3D printing process. And so we're just now getting into compiling all that material, and then we're kind of thinking about like what's next, what's the next project, how can we top that, because it was pretty fun.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, again, I appreciate your time, Brian. We will include links for the Barber Museum, the YouTube channel, and so forth in the show notes. Thanks for being on the show.
Great talking to you, Greg. Thanks so much.
Awesome. For the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast, I'm Greg Drevenstedt. Thanks for listening, and keep the rubber side down. If you've enjoyed listening to the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast, please subscribe, leave us a positive rating, and tell your friends. We also encourage you to visit ridermagazine.com, where you can get the latest in motorcycle news and reviews and sign up for our free weekly newsletter. You can also subscribe to print and digital editions of Rider Magazine, which is published 12 times a year. Thanks again for listening.